The federal election was less than 2 weeks ago, and Green Party leader Elizabeth May now says she would potentially like to become Speaker of the House of Commons, or Andrew Scheer's old job. Joining me now to discuss this is our parliamentary reporter, Filion. Ray, what does that mean for those who voted for May and her Green Party candidates?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Parliament hasn't reconvened yet. Elizabeth May just elected 3 MPs to the House of Commons, including herself, and she's already talking about maybe ditching her role as a Green Party leader. She says the time has come for her to pass the torch on to someone else. She hasn't said exactly when she intends to do that, but she thinks that if the government stays in power for a couple of years or more, she might have time before the next election to resign as Green Party leader, and perhaps, she says, become the next Speaker of the House of Commons. She could be a candidate when the House reconvenes, maybe before Christmas, or maybe it's only going to be in January. Now, what's interesting about Elizabeth May is that just a couple of hours after she said that publicly, that she was thinking about the Speaker's job, she attacked Jagmeet Singh on Twitter, saying he ran a fear-based, US-style, well-funded, dishonest campaign of attack ads to hang on to seats in British Columbia. Now, remember, when you're the Speaker of the House of Commons, you're supposed to be nonpartisan. So it was kind of awkward for her to say, yeah, I'm interested in the job of Speaker of the House, and then attack Jagmeet Singh on Twitter the way she did. So we'll see if she becomes a candidate or not in the coming weeks.
Ray, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was very quiet this week, and he also hired 2 outside women to advise him on what, per se?
On a whole bunch of things. We were told last week by the Prime Minister himself that Canadians gave him a lot of things to consider now that he's been demoted from having a majority government to minority government. So he's got a lot of things to think about, how he's going to navigate through this new reality, what kind of voice he's going to give to Western Canada, because as you know, the Liberals didn't elect a single MP from Alberta and Saskatchewan. So he's hired Anne McClellan, a former well-known Liberal cabinet minister who has ties to Alberta, and Isabelle Hudon, who's the current Canadian ambassador to France, to advise him on what to do. I understand they're running meetings with potential cabinet ministers to make sure nobody has any kind of skeletons in their closet. So it's on November 20th that he will unveil the composition of that new cabinet. He says it's going to be gender balanced, as many men as women, once again, as he did in 2015. So he's taking his time right now. He's given himself a few weeks to figure things out, how he's going to go about. With Gerald Butts gone now, he still has Katie Telford, his chief of staff, but it looks like he needed extra help to advise him on what to do. And one interesting note, on October 31st, usually Justin Trudeau goes out trick-or-treating. He usually wears a costume. He was disguised as Sherlock Holmes a few years ago, as Superman a couple of years ago. He portrayed Clark Kent, but no such thing this year. I understand that following the blackface and brownface controversy that we had over the last few weeks during the election campaign, people have heard enough, they figured, in the Prime Minister's office of Mr. Trudeau's costume. So he's decided to lay low between now and his next trip to Rideau Hall. He did go to Rideau Hall this week, though, to formally inform the Governor General that he has won the election, that he thinks he can form a government that will have the confidence of the House. But even that was a private event. News media weren't invited.
Ray, Trudeau was supposed to be heading to Chile, but not anymore. Perhaps some of the civil unrest in that Latin American country may have something to do with it?
That's exactly what's going on. The Chilean president decided to cancel the APEC summit, which is the Asia-Pacific summit. Justin Trudeau was supposed to go there in mid-November. He's also canceled, the Chilean president, an international climate change summit that was slated to take place in his country in mid-December. Thousands of people have been arrested over the past few weeks in violent protests. We understand that more than 20 people were killed as well. So a very difficult situation in Chile. So we don't know right now if another country will be organizing the APEC summit or if it's just going to be canceled. We were told that Canada has decided not to host any of those 2 summits that were supposed to take place in Chile. The understanding here is that Justin Trudeau has enough on his plate. His government was just newly re-elected, so he's got a lot of things to do this fall. Organizing a summit on such short notice wouldn't be a good idea, according to Canadian officials. So we don't know if those two summits are going to be taking place at all now that they've been canceled by the Chilean president.
You know, Ray, it says in the Bible, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. What's with all these Tories taking shots at Andrew Scheer? Former Harper cabinet minister Peter MacKay even took a jab at Conservative leader Andrew Scheer at a recent event in Washington. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that surprised a lot of people in Tory circles on Wednesday afternoon. Mr. MacKay was in Washington, D.C. He was taking part in a conference organized by the Wilson Center to discuss the recent Canadian election. He was one of the panelists, and right off the bat, the moderator asked him, "Well, what happened? How come the Conservatives under Andrew Scheer weren't able to do better than Justin Trudeau's Liberals, who were mired in several controversies, blackface, and so on?" Uh, Mr. MacKay's answer, he was talking about his party's performance under Mr. Scheer's leadership. He said, and I quote here, "To use a good Canadian analogy, it was like having a breakaway on an open net and missing the net." He added that issues like same sex marriage and abortion were thrust on the agenda and hung around Mr. Scheer's neck like a stinking albatross, and he wasn't able to deftly deal with those issues when the opportunities arose. End of the quote here. So it sounded like a very strong rebuke of Mr. Scheer's leadership at a time when some Tories are mentioning Mr. MacKay's name as a potential successor. Now, a few hours after that conference, Mr. MacKay took to Twitter to walk back his criticism. He wrote, rather, and I quote, "I've repeatedly said I support Andrew Scheer and I worked very hard to help in the campaign. Reports of me organizing are false," he said. "Recent comments are about our party's shortcomings and making the necessary improvements with modern policies and better communications so we can win the next election." So he said he was being constructive. Some Conservatives told me he was very clumsy with his remarks in Washington on Wednesday. That probably chipped away at his credibility. There were reports as well on Thursday afternoon to the fact that he spoke with Andrew Scheer over the phone on Thursday morning, but we're told by Mr. Scheer's people that that didn't happen.
Now, the former Premier of New Brunswick and Canadian lawyer Bernard Lord is said to be organizing a potential leadership run.
That's what some people are saying. He's been very discreet, very quiet since the federal election. We're told by some Tories in Quebec that they would like to have him as a potential leadership contender should the job become open in the next few months. Bernard Lord was also approached by many Conservatives, particularly from Eastern Canada, 4 years ago after the Tories failed to win re-election under Stephen Harper, and Mr. Harper ended up quitting. And at that time, what I find very interesting is that Mr. Lord said, "Absolutely not. I'm not interested. Forget about me. I'm not going to run." And he didn't run. He was no candidate in the last leadership run. This time around, he's being very quiet. He hasn't returned any of our calls. So does that mean that he is indeed organizing? We can only ask the question right now, but yeah, very discreet Bernard Lord, who's of course perfectly bilingual, former Premier of New Brunswick, originally from Quebec. Some Tories would like to have him, but we'll see if he's interested or not.
The NDP held its first post-election meeting on Wednesday, Ray. They lost 15 seats. How can they really view 2019 as a success for them?
Yeah, Jagmeet Singh surprised a lot of people when he was dancing on stage on election night when his party actually lost a lot of ground and went from being the third party in the House of Commons to being the fourth in the next parliament. So yeah, newly elected MPs and defeated candidates gathered on Wednesday here in the nation's capital. They had a lot to talk about, but Jagmeet Singh says he is not taking any of the blame for his party's performance. He attributed rather the loss of seats that the NDP suffered to Justin Trudeau's call for strategic voting. You know, inviting voters to rally behind the Liberals to prevent the Tories from winning government. According to Jagmeet Singh, that was the difference maker. It doesn't look like he's going to be challenged by Tories, that there's going to be a confidence vote like we saw 4 years ago for Tom Mulcair. Remember, the party showed him the door in Edmonton. Looks like he's going to be around and he'll get another kick of the can. I haven't heard anyone calling for his resignation.
It appears as though Canada's credit rating remains good despite the government's big deficits. Ray, how's that possible? I miss a couple of payments on my credit card and my credit score drops 10 points.
Yeah, I guess it's not the same. The same rules don't apply to individuals and countries. Major international credit agencies like Standard & Poor's stated this week that they have no problem with Canada running even larger deficits in the years to come, as Justin Trudeau promised to do during the campaign. They say it won't have an impact on Canada's AAA rating. That's because the country's debt to GDP ratio remains one of the best of all industrialized countries. And I got some numbers here. The debt to GDP ratio here in Canada right now at the federal level, it's different when it comes to provinces, but for Canada, it's 27.6%. In Germany, it's 44.5%. The US's GDP ratio, debt to GDP ratio stands at 80.7%. In Italy, it's 119% and 151% in Mexico. So by that standard, Canada is doing quite well. I know a lot of Canadians feel uneasy about the big deficits that the Liberals have been running in the past 4 years, and the even larger deficits that they're going to be running, it seems, in the years to come. But the international credit agencies don't see it that way.
An independent senator has quit the Senate, saying the independent senators are really not that independent, Ray.
Only independent in name, it seems. André Pratt was one of the first independent senators appointed to the upper house by Justin Trudeau. He was named to the Senate and became a senator in March 2016, and he quit on election night, believe it or not, at 9:30 Eastern on election night. He said he didn't want to quit during the campaign because he didn't want to be a distraction, and he didn't want to quit after election night because he says some people would have thought that he didn't like the result of the election, and that was the reason he was quitting. But no, in his letter, he said there can come a time when we realize we simply do not have the skills and motivation required to accomplish the task we have been entrusted with. He says he likes being independent and nonpartisan, but in the current Senate, even with all those independent senators, he's come to the conclusion that it's just impossible to be independent. There's too much partisanship in the Senate. What's also amazing is that he's leaving a $142,000 a year job. He's only 62. He would have had job security until age 75. And because he quit after less than 3 years, he's not entitled to a pension, which, you need to have 6 years at least of continuous service in the Senate to qualify for a very lucrative pension. So he's leaving all that on the table, which is quite astonishing. He's 62 years of age. He says he has some plans for the future. He wants to get his MBA, which is something he says he's been thinking about for a while. But yeah, quite a surprising move on the part of a Canadian senator. You don't see that every day.
Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Filion, joining me once again from Ottawa. Thanks so much, Ray.
Always a pleasure, Hal.